Good morning, dear audience here and online. Welcome to the NDC Pavilion. My name is Romain. Sorry, I didn't get that. Oh, it's okay, this close, okay. So my name is Romain. I work for the European Training Foundation. I'll be your host for this session. So we have a fantastic panel of distinguished policymakers and practitioners with very diverse profiles, which I'll introduce in a minute. We have just under an hour, so I propose to break this down into three distinct chunks. A brief intro, a warm-up round of questions to basically identify the issues that we all agree on, and then a second round of questions where we can go more in depth and identify solutions and discuss things that actually work on the ground. And then we'll conclude with a short Q&A towards the end. So without further ado, let me get started with a brief scene setter, if I can call it like that. So education and training systems are essential to the green transition, but they can also slow it down if they don't keep up and capture all workers with the evolving green skills demand, green skills, but skills in general. So many schools and programs lag in updating their curricula to cover critical areas like renewable energies. We'll talk about this very soon, circular economy practices, and other processes linked to the green industries. And that can lead, of course, to a mismatched skills and labor market needs. So there's also one of the things that has been certainly assessed in Western Europe is the limited access to lifelong learning, which makes it hard for current workers to upskill for green sectors, which creates barriers to a workforce adaptation. So addressing these gaps will help education systems empower the agents of change who actually drive the green transition. So the deadline for countries to submit their next NDCs is with new targets for 2035 is in just a few months away. I think it's February in 2025. And ambition means nothing without action. So this is the idea that we would like to discuss today. How can the knowledge and the intelligence we have on skilling systems can support the NDC rollout and certainly their future updates. So without further ado, I'm going to ask the panelists to each one in turn come up to the podium to answer a brief warm-up question. I will start with Pilvi. Pilvi is the director of the European Training Foundation, an executive agency of the EU. Pilvi has served as a state secretary in 3 ministries in Finland. She was a member of the Finnish parliament and now currently leads an EU executive agency. You also have a PhD in social sciences, notably education in the Western Balkans. Dear PLV, can I ask you to come to the stage? And what do we know in terms of the requirements of the skilled force for decarbonization programs and industrial goals? Can you help us understand the situation? I think you're okay with that? Yeah, please.
So everyone gets prepared, huh? Okay, what do we know? I will be very brief in the interest of conversation this morning. Good morning also on my behalf. Perhaps first as saying what is the evidence basis on which I talk. So ETF, European Training Foundation, as EU agency, works on the human capital development outside the EU member states, primarily in the neighborhood, but neighborhood also being including Central Asian countries, North Africa, and also some specific programs with the African Union. And we divide our work under 3 headings, so monitoring and analysis of systems, in particular lifelong learning systems, and the focus on the vocational education and training. But of course, in order to understand that, you need to understand what happens in the systems before and after, so increasingly also looking at the whole chain of education. So monitoring and analysis, then skills, intelligence and foresight, understanding with the future of work type of big data analysis, where are we going, what are the needs and trends, and finally policy dialogue and advice with the geographical regions where we work, and of course together with the Commission and together with the Commission with the countries, so that the programming and the work towards meaningful, sustainable economies would be possible. So based on that analytical framework that the ETF does and has, I would probably take 2 points here. The first one is that if you look at education and training, so there are sort of two separate, in a way, tracks, both important. One is that you, of course, need the sort of green transition requirement to the sort of lowest to highest level of education system. So you can't say that it's this part but not that part. But the goals are different. So if you look at the early years, the primary education, it's more about the values and awareness. When you move to secondary education level, it's already about competencies. And finally, when we come to the professional degrees, university degrees, we require sort of high-level professionals able to start their working careers immediately. And those are, of course, and that's the system level. And then you, of course, have people who are in our current workforces, who are needing different skilling, reskilling and upskilling elements. And that's a sort of different type of approach than the whole systemic approach, of course, both interlinked. And then a second, probably, so first, the education system requirements is that the whole systemic level in the long term, but also then the current needs need to be served. And then the second, probably, sort of framework to look at is that we, of course, have the whole workforce reallocation question. So we have certain sectors and industries where clearly there will be less jobs or more jobs, and that reallocation of people is needed, and that analysis hence very important, and that we are trying to look in the future of work. So, of course, obvious sectors like fossil fuel driven sectors, but also others come forward. But then you have the sort of occupational adaptation needs, that's the skills needs, and that goes really across the fields. Here in this week, I think many discussions have brought forward fields such as care. So what happens in the care sector is highly significant for many reasons. It's a gender issue, it's an equality issue, it can be an energy issue. So there you have then the sort of skilling element that is going across the sectors regardless, actually, I mean, with the analysis, of course, of the differences. But this both, so the reallocation of labor force and the reskilling needs across the sectors, of course, has a huge impact as to what we need to do in terms of to meet the needs of the future of work. So I would start with these two, really the education system level, long-term and short-term, and then the understanding the difference between sectors changing, but also the holistic approach to all sectors. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very insightful introduction. I'm now going to ask Barbara Kaufmann, who is the Director for Employment and Social Governance and Analysis at the European Commission DG for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. You're the Director since 2015. Your current responsibilities include the European Semester Coordination, EU legislative initiatives, including the EU Framework on Minimum Wages, and the Council recommendation to ensure a fair transition towards climate neutrality, as well as an action plan tackling skills and labor shortages. You clearly have views on this subject. Can you help us understand which are the programs that the EU pursues to support the human dimension of decarbonization goals? Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Romain. I'm really happy to be here at the NDC Partnership Pavilion, and also with my colleague from the ETF Training Foundation, Pilvi, and the other colleagues on the panel. I think the topic is extremely important. Skilling is one of the key ingredients to making sure that the green transition will be successful. and also fair, I have to say, inclusive. And from that point of view, this is something that is very much high on our agenda. Maybe I should just say a word in terms of having launched in 2019 the European Green Deal. At that moment, the EU announced that we will be climate neutral by 2050 and also set an intermediate target of minus 55 CO2 emissions by 2030. In February, by the way, we proposed another target for 2040. All this is then input into the NDCs, for the EU, and that is still being discussed, but we hopefully will soon, in a couple of months, come out as NDC for the EU. Now, what we always underlined is that, of course, the green transition needs to be fair, and then when, as part of the so-called Fit for 55 package of over 20 legislative pieces to support the realization of our 2030 target, we've also put one, you mentioned it, Romain, which is the Council recommendation, which was, by the way, adopted by all 27 member states unanimously, by all, asked member states to put together comprehensive policy packages to make sure that the green transition is fair. It starts with an employment component and a skills component, taxation and social protection, and it asks for a whole of society approach, meaning especially social partners have to be heavily involved in the design of these packages, but also in the implementation, and not only social partners, but all the civil society. So I think that's already important now. That is one framework. Another framework I would like to mention is the national energy and climate plans that all member states have to formulate, and that also includes just transition policies in the labor market and the skills. So there are all these things that are also then formulated at a member state level. Then specifically focusing on skills, we have this overarching framework, the skills agenda, already since 2020, has roughly, I think, 12 pieces, and then, of course, much more if you look into the detail. For instance, skills intelligence, which is highly relevant when we're talking here about the green transition. It is not about now what the labor market needs, it's what the labor market might need in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, because that shapes also the education systems of today. And but it's also highly relevant for the skills, for the skilling. That I wanted to say is one element that is important, that also includes, for instance, the Pact for Skills, and that gets a bit more concrete because it means there are several, over 10, I mean, maybe it's 20 by now, Pact for Skills for ecosystems, where together training providers, governments, social partners, and other stakeholders define training needs, let's say, for batteries, for the coming few years, and then say how much does it cost, how many people do we have to train, and then deliver it. So I think that's a very important element that we have. We also have the net zero industry academies that are set up in clean sectors, which aim to train in each of the sectors 100,000 workers per year. We had last year the European Year of Skills, to showcase how important skills are. We are now, the President von der Leyen just announced for her new commission in the guidelines a union for skills, which also talks about recognition of qualifications when people move around, because that has sometimes been a problem. And then we have various funds. I would like to mention, for instance, the Just Transition Fund that helps carbon regions that design their paths to then retrain people in a specific area where they want to diversify to. And similarly, we have the European Social Fund. For instance, I'm responsible for the implementation, to support the implementation in Greece and Cyprus. And that is also a major skilling element, as well as support for employment. Lastly, let me mention the Recovery and Resilience Fund that is maybe only there for a few years, but is dealing with major rollout of skilling also. but 37%, and that's my last point, 37% of this of this Recovery and Resilience Fund have to be dedicated to green investments. So I stop here with the first point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Barbara, for helping us understand how the European approaches this important issue, and more importantly, what programs are available. So the next speaker is also called Barbara Rombusek. You work at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. You're the Global Director for Gender and Economic Inclusion. I understand you have largely established the bank's approach to integrating equality of opportunity and a human capital consideration into the private sector investments. So my question to you is, how does the EBRD approach skilling and education needs in your support to the green transition? Please come to the podium.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here today, and even better to have a namesake on the same panel. That doesn't happen very often, I have to say. So thank you very much for the invitation. At EBRD, maybe very briefly, we invest about 75% in the private sector, 25% in infrastructure investments, where there is no private sector. But fundamentally, we are a private sector investment bank. We work from Egypt to Estonia and Morocco to Mongolia now, and we are actually in the process of expanding our countries of operation by 6 additional countries in sub-Saharan Africa next year. So why do we invest in skills, and how do we do that? Fundamentally, the private sector, of course, has a huge role to play, both in the climate transition, but also in relation to building the skills within the workforce that are required in order to make that transition. Because ultimately, our clients are 2 things. They are employers. They need people who have the right skills and capacity to carry this transition. But they're also providers of goods and services. And of course, we all exist in a broader ecosystem whereby if we don't bring people along, and if we don't give people an opportunity to also participate in the opportunities that the green economy transition can bring, we ultimately won't have the political, the social, economic mandate in order to proceed with many of the sometimes very difficult changes to how we live, work, do business, etc. So bringing people along, giving them the skills, giving them the opportunities to grow businesses, start businesses, work in this new world, in this new economy, is of critical importance. And that's something that we as an investor recognize, but it is also something that our clients very much recognize. So investing in the green economy, investing in a just transition is very much at the center of what we do. So how do we do that? We actually build a business case. We convince our clients, and we build their capacity to recognize what kind of skills they need today, but importantly, tomorrow. And we work with partners such as the ETF in order to facilitate that assessment and understanding of what kind of skills are needed. And then we also build the capacity of our clients to build partnerships with training providers from TVET all the way to universities in order to invest in the skills of the workforce that they either already have or the workforce in the broader market. So there's a big role, I think, that the private sector and employers can also play in terms of investing in training, investing in skills forecasting, and ultimately also engaging with relevant authorities, ministries, in order to participate in shaping longer-term skills policies and reforms that actually contribute to that. And we, as an investment bank, we can build a bridge between employers, between policymakers, between education providers, and also between other investors. So that, in a way, is a catalyzing function that we see as EBRD. So how does that link to the NDCs then? If that in a way comes back to the point I made earlier about the broader policy framework and the importance of ensuring that a focus on skills, a focus on people is also part of the broader policy framework. So we do that very concretely by working with our countries of operation and advising them on NDCs and across a range of different elements of the NDCs, but also on the skills part of the NDCs. So we have developed something called the Gender Equality and Climate Action Accelerator, a GECA accelerator. And that, in a way, is a stock-taking exercise for our countries of operation to understand to what extent is a focus on just transition, a focus on gender and skills already integrated into the NDCs or still missing. And if it is still missing, what kind of policies will be required for them in order to close that gap? So that's a very practical tool that we have developed and that we are now implementing. But the focus on bridging that gap between investments, private sector, education providers, and then on the policy side is really critically important. So I can later on give you a lot of more concrete examples in terms of what kind of investments we have in this space, what they look like, and how we work with all these different partners and bring them all together. But maybe I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've heard from the policy and data analysts, from the policy makers, and now from a key development bank. Let's hear from the practitioners, the people who actually require the skills. Mate Hayes, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. You oversee Solar Power Europe's work on emerging and overseas markets. You also work on quality, innovation, donor-funded grants and projects. Notably, you ensure the association's presence and impact on the global stage. We are happy to be able to host you here today. Is the lack of trained workforce actually hindering the low-carbon tech rollout? Can you try to answer that question, please, for us?
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, Roman, for the introduction. So indeed, I work for Solar Power Europe, which is the European association representing the solar sector. We're based in Brussels because we work a lot with the European Commission, the other European institutions, and we have over 300 members covering the entire solar value chain, including manufacturers, developers, service providers, and also companies from neighboring segments. And of course, they all need skilled workers. But maybe to set the scene, let me just tell you about the situation of solar in Europe currently. So we have about 330 gigawatt of installed solar in 2024, and it's a lot. We expect to triple this installed capacity approximately by 2030. So solar is growing exponentially, and it also means that as of today already, wind and solar, so the two leading sources of renewable energy and variable renewable energy, are already producing more electricity in Europe than all fossil fuels combined. So this also shows how fast solar energy is growing. And so what I also want to say is that solar PV is not only growing fast, but it's also the most affordable source of energy. And so it is also the most job-intensive source of energy. So it means that each gigawatt installed requires thousands of jobs. It's a good combination, isn't it? It generates a lot of jobs, requires, of course, a lot of skilled workers as well, but it's affordable, very affordable at the same time. That's one of the reasons why we really love solar. So as of 2023, the solar sector sustained and created 826,000 jobs in Europe. And we expect this number to go to approximately 1.1 million by 2030. And the solar sector has the potential to create about 4 million jobs by 2040. We actually published, we have one of our flagship reports, an annual report that we update each year is a report on solar jobs. It can be downloaded from our website. It includes numbers on, on job creation, but also different types of breakdowns and insights. It is also interesting to see that, apart from solar being a very job-intensive sector, most of the jobs created by the solar sector are concentrated in the downstream segment. That means deployment primarily, and to some extent also operation and maintenance. In the upstream segment, so in the manufacturing segment, there are relatively less jobs, which has two reasons. One is that that segment is less job intensive, but also because there's less manufacturing in Europe. The solar supply chain, solar manufacturing is very much concentrated outside of Europe. And the Net Zero Industry Act was actually mentioned earlier today. One of the main objective of that European directive and initiative is, of course, to reshore clean tech manufacturing to Europe, and we hope that this will be a successful initiative. As Solar Europe, we are supporting reshoring solar manufacturing to Europe very much, and we hope that that segment, the upstream segment, will be able to create more jobs in Europe as well. But so indeed, you know, the growing solar is set to be the leading source of energy of the future, and this means that in order to deliver this, in order to really be able to become the leading source of energy and to contribute to Europe's climate goals, we need a lot of skilled workers, because it's and this also relates to the fact that it's not enough to install a lot of solar. It's also important to install solar energy in a high quality manner, so that we don't only have a lot of solar panels installed, but that those solar panels are able to deliver a lot of energy, as much energy as possible. And this is where we see a gap, a skills gap. So it is, and that is why Solar Power Europe is working on skills and developing best practice guidelines, for example, on topics such as operation and maintenance, EPC, so engineering, procurement, and construction, putting forward recommendations and best practices on how to install and operate and maintain solar power plants that they can perform reliably and in a quality manner in a long term. So this is our stance to skills. That is why you know, skills are really important for the solar sector as well, and we actually do need to work to bridge this gap, and in order to, you know, to reach 1.1 million jobs by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So last but certainly not least, we have the authority on the subject. I want to turn to Romeo Bertolini, who's the head of operations at the NDC partnership. Can you oversee the rollout of NDCs in many different parts of the world? You've heard this scene setter. Can you help us understand what are the main challenges that you see in terms of the NDC rollout, and certainly the skills that are available in the populations?
Thank you very much. And I had a couple of bullet points, but I'm so inspired by what you said, dear colleagues, because this is a bit proving my suspicion. In this scene, in this circus that you hear today and for the whole week, probably in my case at least, you know, they're very self-referential. There's a lot going on in climate, NDCs, you know, and nobody really looks left, right, and center. They think they are the center of the world. The COP is every day, every year, and so forth. This is my 10th COP. Hence, I'm a bit self-critical. But hearing that what is actually already happening in this sector is extremely important. And we are about to, you know, see, and I need to share the context with you. We're about to see the COP presidency. Of course, you saw that looking for a green skills initiative and so forth, as if there is nothing out there. And I mean, I've been in charge of Egypt and Syria at the BMZ 10, 15 years ago, and we had already, you know, trainings for TVIT, for mechatronics, for wind turbines, and things like that. So it's not really, I mean, number one, it's not rocket science. The scale is the issue probably, and the involvement of the private sector, and you said it. And I think when it comes to your question, it has multi-dimensions, right? I have the feeling, you know, now with a lot of other issues, you know, because of the funding and the ODA flows and the climate money flows, everybody puts a climate tag on something. This stuff is really interesting, though, because that's, of course, necessary. But does it really need to be in the NDC? Where does it fit in the plethora of, don't worry, in the plethora of the plans that we are seeing, you know? Does it, in the NDC, we have the mitigation targets, we have the mitigation targets, we have the adaptation targets. This is broken down into investment plans. These investment plans are there for energy, forests, whatever. And of course, you need skills there, and you need people that understand that. So I also once argued with Norwegian head of education from NORAD, and she said, but don't we need to start in the primary level, for instance, in order to make sure that the kids already understand what this is all about? And then you go to the, you go to what? Long story short, I think what really is needed, and what I think is the best to do, is when we want to engage with the in this field, is to really take stock what is there. And that's why I was really interested in this GECA tool, that we have to look at this. Number one. Number two, I think what we also, and what countries need to see and to drive forward, is making this connection in country. Talk to the education ministry for the regulatory environment, and of course talk to the private sector, because the private sector is in need of that, and there's a lot to gain and a lot to lose on the side of the private sector. So, and making these connections is something that we are trying right now, and we work with GIZ and the NDC, and I invite, of course, ETF and you guys to join forces there and make the connection, to look into 5-6 countries where we know we have already some degree of technical vocational training. Kenya, Namibia there, Jordan, if I remember correctly, Ethiopia potentially, and maybe others. We are still in. It's not so easy to make these connections, because the education guys are there, and then you have the climate guys, and there needs to be this kind of common language. Yeah? And I think that's something which we, as small as this group is here today, where we probably need to focus now on, and maybe making this kind of connections, if they're not yet already exist, between those that think, they save the world now, bringing green skills into climate, and those that actually work on green skills already. So that would be that's the opportunity probably. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Romeo. So we've now, I think, set the scene. We've established what are some of the obstacles, in a preliminary way. We've also looked at some of the solutions. Let's take this further now in the second part, and see how we can integrate skills and employment needs, requirements into or associate them to climate strategies. So some of the solutions that may work, and certainly some of the best practice if anybody has something they wish to report. So I want to start with Barbara Kaufmann from the DG Employment. Can you help us understand how I think the audience understands we are in between two commissions. A lot of questions are still open as to what will be the main policies and certainly the goals. But can you, in your view, what is likely to be the role of international cooperation in accelerating the green transition?
Yes, I expect some stability in terms of our wish to support partner countries around the globe in this very endeavor, because we also have to imagine that the green transition is, by the way, something that, in Europe we don't even have 10% of the emissions. So if we do a wonderful job in reskilling our labor force, this is not going to save the planet, right? So I think there has to be a much broader effort, which of course is also signified what is happening here in COP. I would say a bit to start with our neighborhood, the Western Balkans, who one day might join the EU and are preparing for that. For instance, I mentioned that we have the Just Transition mechanism to support coal regions in Europe, which includes a skilling element, Well, a similar thing is also happening in the Western Balkans, so which is then also supported, that they have transition strategies, including skilling elements, and that this is supported also by EU instruments. And more broadly, the Global Gateway is supporting strategies, including green and skilling. We have also some precise projects with some countries around the globe, partner countries, and so that is one way how we do. And of course, the ETF, part of the EU, is doing also its great job in supporting these efforts. So by now, I mean, the largest amount of public funding to climate finance worldwide comes from the EU, and so it's clearly also including some of these elements. Then we do have also some international cooperation. For instance, here now at COP, my part of the Commission, DG Employment, is co-organizing with the ILO, the Just Transition Pavilion. Some call it the ILO Pavilion, but okay, it's our joint pavilion. And we are animating now for various days discussions, including on skills, including on social dialogue. The involvement of social partners is an important element of the transition. So I think that is also something that helps. So here I'm coming more to the sort of global level. Also, we are participating and supporting financially an initiative that is part of the Clean Energy Ministerial, mostly about energy ministries and technological cooperation, but there's an Empowering Peoples initiative together with Canada and the US. We are in the lead of that, and that also has a skilling of the workforce component, even online training sessions from time to time, but anyway, focusing very much on skills. So I think these are some elements. Of course, it's also true that as part of the fact that we have a shrinking population, losing 1 million every year. By 2050 will be 36 million working age population. We are also trying to be a continent that is becoming more attractive to people from abroad to join the labor force in the EU, and that also means partnerships in skilling. And I think that also, of course, has the one element that we are trying to attract some of these talents, but of course we all know how it is with workers' remittances, brain drain. These people hopefully come back to at least some of them with much better skills. So I think all that is part of what we do, and especially when training some of the people before they even join the EU. For us, it's important that this doesn't only benefit us and those who come, but also locally.
Thank you very much for this overview of what the EU will continue to do. I want to now pass the floor to Pilvi. Based on what we've heard so far, how can skills intelligence support the rollouts of the NDCs? And if you agree with that statement, how could that be done?
Thank you. Perhaps doing a little bit what, now I have to get it right, Romeo, no? Did, not going out of the script, but being inspired by what has been said. I think it's been extremely insightful, and being actually bringing the elements, as you said, that while there is a lot of sort of very general talk about, for instance, green skills, without defining what they are, and also probably recognizing the work of 20 years that has happened in some, but also then the systemic level needs that are probably not recognized, as said with the Ministers of Education, so that there is really levels in this discussion, which I have enjoyed. I will go to this actually probably to the what just with first remark first, and I think the skills sort of mismatch that you mentioned that you need in order to create those jobs is of course fundamental there, Because if that is not being met, then everyone loses. The businesses lose and the individuals lose. So I think that's a very fundamental recognition to be made over and over and over again, because it's a sort of commonplace, but the measures need to be on a scale too. And on the other hand, if we don't document the needs, as you said, you know, your 4 million figure, and really analyze it carefully, we are in a path where we actually will have even more skills mismatch and probably also unemployment in many countries, not necessarily within the current European borders, but definitely immediately, for instance, on our southern remits in Northern Africa, where you have a massive sectors going through changes and huge populations. So the whole analysis, both what's coming and then what are the measures and that taken now, because these don't happen overnight. I often stress that in skilling and education policies, it's always years and easily 5 years where you see the results of your policies, and that's why it's so important to be as sort of insightful with foresight as possible. Then really to the concretes, what is happening now and what probably would need to be happening even more. And I say something about monitoring, and I say something about concrete bottom-up initiatives. On the side of monitoring, that's bad news in a way. As ETF, when we look at the kind of monitoring of the countries that is being done by the countries where we work, generally speaking, on the future of work needs and the skills needs, I think in my current list was that it's only we've seen in Egypt, Serbia, Morocco, Albania, Georgia, and Israel, even some reporting of the existence of skills monitoring instruments that really help to shape the labor market needs. And if we work in about 30 countries, that means that about 25 of them don't really have any, and even these are relatively poor and not focusing that much on the particular sector we are talking here today. So there is a lot to be said about monitoring and also tools for the countries. And I think here the presence of EU mechanisms now, for instance, for the accession countries are extremely valuable. Yesterday I was in a panel with the Vice Minister of Serbia for energy, and she referred to all EU goals in the field of just transition actually now being the goals of Serbia, and that's a very significant, I think, message also for this discussion. So monitoring requires attention and is complex, and I think more needs to be done. On the side of then, the good news is that I think we see at the moment something really in this technical and vocational education which anyone in the field 10 years ago would not have believed, namely really international elements. The Commission has supported, I think, very importantly, something called Centers of Vocational Excellence creation, and we see it as a sort of coordinator of the work, ETF, really going organically. So I think it's about now 300 centers across the world, from sort of Canada to Finland to sub-Saharan Africa to Ukraine, which are all recognizing the same needs, because in particular in the sort of green digital transition, which always I think also should be brought together, because yes, we want clean energy, but we also want to save energy, and then digitalization comes into play. So the vocational education really is looking into ways of skilling the youth workforce and also reskilling the adult workforce. And these centers can share practices, share content, and it's quite inspiring to be with them when they actually take on the frameworks that player like ETF can develop and then take them to the practice in their own contexts. And here, for instance, examples in Egypt, which has decided that their goal is that 10% of the every generation of new workforce actually does leave the country. So they are willing to skill their people to go with relevant expertise and competencies, and there I think the technical vocational education and systems can really be very helpful. So therefore, Roman, I think the message sort of strategic level, the monitoring element is really lacking in many places, and if we can help that in a sort of bigger scale and large institutional players, it's very useful. But then to recognize the sort of bottom-up initiatives again and bring them to the strategic level in these discussions can be actually faster than any policymaker thought 10 years ago would be possible. And that gives me, I must say, hope in these relatively grim times in many ways.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to hear what Barbara Rambusek thinks about this. How does the EBRD link its support for the climate transition to skills development? How do you reconcile these two needs in your operations?
Thank you very much. So as I mentioned before, but as we have also heard from many of the other speakers, it has to be a concerted effort. Skills is part of a bigger transition, this green economy transition, and we all in a way play an important role. What we have started to do over the past few years is to actually look at it at a country level. And not to look just at our own investments, but also look at our investments in the context of actually a broader investment package and a coordinated investment package going into a particular country. So let me give you two examples here, and we just heard from Pilvi about Egypt. Indeed, so in Egypt there is something called NUAFI, which is the nexus of water, energy, food, and with EBRD leading on the energy side. And the aim there is to decommission 5 gigawatt worth of gas-fired power plants and to commission 10 gigawatt worth of renewables. In the process, of course, there's a strong focus also on skills, on labor markets, on people, to avoid people being left with stranded skills and to support the country and the region overall in this labor market transition. And we're working actually very closely with the ETF, but also with many others. And it's about working with our client to look at who can be retrained, upskilled, in what kind of skills. So we are working with one of our partners who's deploying AI, for example, to understand what kind of skills will be needed in the labor market beyond the energy sector. And how can we prepare, reskill and upskill people in this context. And so we also take the responsibility of our clients to support this process, but to also reach out to local policymakers, regional development agencies, and other partners in order to contribute. Another example is North Macedonia, where again, we are part of a very well coordinated country-level platform together with many donors, including the European Commission, the World Bank, the CIF, GCF, and many others, but also working with the relevant authorities and including, very importantly, the Ministry for Education, which is one of the players that very often is not part of these sort of concerted efforts, and also Ministry for Labour and regional development agencies in order to really shift away the labour markets from coal into green energy, into green sectors, and to support people in their journey along this sort of labour market transition. So here we again look at setting up training centres, skill centres, investing in training provision, also SME startups, but SME growth as well through finance, through advisory, capacity building. So I think it's this partnership approach and this focus that we don't individually just focus on our particular areas of what we can contribute, but really try and come up with bigger packages that leverage what we each contribute, but therefore achieve a lot more at a country level.
Thank you very much. Very insightful insights from the ground. So let's turn on to the practitioner. Clearly, we want to hear your views on this. Does this resonate with you? And we have, I'm being told we have, we need to conclude now. So in a few words, how do you, at your level, reconcile the need for skills and their needs to decarbonize quickly? Does this conversation make sense to your members?
Thank you, Romain. Indeed, absolutely. We do need skills to decarbonize because, as explained, we will need over 1 million skilled workers by 2030 in order to be able to maintain the growth of the solar sector and to deliver, and solar is the most important technology to deliver Europe's climate goals. But what I want to say is that there are different objectives that we see when it comes to skills. So on the one hand, we need the sufficient quantity of skilled workers, but on the other hand, and this is not irreconcilable, of course, but we also need quality skilled workers. And we also need as much standardization as possible from the point of view of companies in terms of skills and skill needs as possible. But we also need local specific skills, for example, in terms of jurisdictions, or when it comes to emerging markets, for example, specific skills specific to local climate conditions, for example. And of course, there is a little bit of an internal contradiction or tension there, because you cannot standardize something that is local specific, or at least there is a challenge in that. But let me also share a personal story on this, because just last year I was installing solar panels on my house, and I engaged an installer, an electrician, and I live in Brussels. I worked with an electrician who usually works in Flanders, so that's one of the other regions outside of Brussels, another region in Belgium, but the same country. And the electrician came and installed the solar panels on my house, but he forgot to install something that is required in Brussels but is not required in Flanders. So he came back a couple of months later, when I realized, when I was talking to the local grid operator, and they told me, no, the green meter wasn't installed. So he came back, he installed the green meter. A couple of months later, it turns out that he installed something else that is not a green meter, another device. So long story short, it took him 9 months to properly install the solar installation in Brussels, because he's used to local conditions and requirements and permitting procedures in Flanders, just 5 kilometers away. So I lost I lost subsidies for green electricity for the entire summer. So that's essentially a year's worth of green electricity. And this shows, I think, that you need to install in quality skills as well, and permitting procedures as well. So it's not only about installing the electricity system properly, but also installers need to know what local permitting procedures are about. So that's why I think local institutions, local organizations have to play a very important role in skilling as well. But there are other segments, such as, for example, the utility scale segment, where standardization is easier. And that's what we're doing. And maybe just to conclude, let me mention that there is a European initiative called the European Solar Academy, which is aimed at developing solar skills across Europe that will be valid across Europe, and we're joining forces with other organizations in the solar sector to do that. And at the global level, there is another initiative led by the Global Solar Council, which is the International Solar Association, the Solar Training Standards Initiative, which is aiming at has the same goals, but at the global level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Romeo. We're going to need to conclude, and I really want to give the word to the audience for questions briefly. But Romeo, can you tell us before we do that, we need to hear from you something. You've got a great overview of NDCs throughout the world. Are there examples of NDCs that actually give consideration? I mean, maybe not the actual text of that NDC, but the package that give consideration to skills and education. Can you tell us about that?
We have analyzed with the inspiration from you and from the green skills work from GIZ and so forth. We've analyzed our data, and this is a huge database that we have on the requests and so forth. And the result was that whereas capacity building and transformation, for instance, plays a huge role in capacity building anyway, right? But because for the government and so forth, but for the transition was mentioned, and just transition was mentioned in about 40% of the NDCs, but only about 10% out of that 40% have something related to skills and capacity building. And we still look for a good example where this is integrated, where you. But I think my best guess would be now when we dig a little bit deeper and when we probably connect, we will have some good examples where this talks to each other. Whether you at the end of the day can now say, okay, this contributes, and this is a bit the problem, right? This contributes to X, Y, Z of the CO2 emissions, or it raises adaptation of that. That's a different story. But I think the good practices, and this is then where this connecting the dots, what you just said, is very important. When we then start to do the peer-to-peer and exchange a little bit on the South-South experience as well, things get really strong and powerful, right? And that is something I think we should really dig a little bit deeper and use us. And this is a bit our philosophy, or the idea is to connect the dots, right? And it works quite well, but it's also very overwhelming, especially, and again I say that, when the climate guys want to do education and without thinking what the education guys are already doing on climate, or not knowing enough probably about it.
Does this work? This works, yeah. So thank you very much. I now really want to give the word to Martin because this is a subject that's very dear to you, and I'm sure you have a burning question to ask one of our panelists. Please take the floor.
Well, thank you, and thank you for speaking to me so kind of clearly. So I work for an organisation called the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment. We're the membership association for people working in sustainability. We have members in 125 countries, and they're dealing with implementation, and skills development and workforce development is a critical issue for them being able to deliver. If I can just pick up on your last point on an example where I think an NDC has translated into an integrated approach. I'm going to take the UK, although... So the UK government NDC includes a link into jobs and skills. And the previous government, not many people say much good about it, but one of the things that it did do is it established something called a Green Jobs Delivery Group, which had the Climate Minister, the Education Minister, the Employment Minister, and the Skills Minister. So you had three ministers and ministries working together on an integrated plan that was looking at both the education system, right the way from primary, and the government produced an education and early years sustainability and climate change strategy, workforce plans with companies, because we know what we need to deliver in terms of the energy transition, how that links into wider aspects of nature-based solutions, and also then how do you deal with employment and building capacity, because I think some aspects is about skills, some is about capacity of known skills and working that through. So there is an example there. I think one of the challenges is around the pace of change. So on solar, you said, how you got a massive increase in between now and 2030, but it takes 5 years to qualify as an electrical installer. Okay, so we know in the UK we have an NDC for 2035 that the government has set this week of an 81% emissions reduction compared to 1990 levels. Between now and 2030, the UK government wants to quadruple the amount of renewable energy in terms of offshore wind, and I think treble or possibly even more the amount of solar. And we have but if you can't forward plan the skills acquisition, then you have migration policies which may or may not support that, then I think that's where you get a challenge. So our view is that NDCs, it's critical that NDCs have an integrated workforce at a national level plan to support delivery, because without it, it will not happen. And I think that that's something that I think you kind of all spoke on. But I do want, the question that I have is around how do you motivate young people to see that these jobs are where their future is? So one is about we can work on education and skills, we can work with supply, but is it the choice of young people to pursue these as careers, or are they going to go into healthcare, or are they going to go into technology? And I think there's a huge aspect of the aspiration, because my final point would be one of the challenges we face is that young people, they do see, or many of them see climate change as an issue, but they don't link it to going to work into infrastructure, into utilities, into actually where the work needs to be done to drive the transformation across our economies. So anything on that would be quite useful. Sorry, that was a long question, but...
Thank you. It's a very relevant question. Who wants to take this up?
Very briefly. So first of all, did you say that in the UK it takes 5 years to get qualified as a solar installer? Is that what you said? An electrical installer.
Because you have a very short time to have this with smart meter rollouts, actually. Train somebody to do a very small piece of work. You have a rush of work, and they don't then have a pathway to a career. So
Okay, so just to say that as Solar Power Europe, as an association, of course, dedicated to promoting solar energy, we're leading multiple communications campaigns, and one of our campaigns is called Generation Solar. It's a series of really cool videos. I invite all of you to have a look at our YouTube channel, and it's promoting solar not only on the use case, on how solar can benefit families and communities, but also why solar is sexy to work in. So we have really cool videos about why it's cool to work in solar in the manufacturing segment, in the installation segment, in research and innovation.
And as a reply also to the climate education, we are publishing next week with UNICEF from the countries where we work, analysis, what do young people actually know about climate change and where do they know about it? And it's really not from formal education, and it's a lot of also misinformation. So hence I think this goes both to the campaigns that are about image, but it really also goes down to the systemic level if we are really to sort of start the awareness creation from the early on.
Super short point. I think we're also trying really hard, because you mentioned it earlier, the women, to interest the girls already in more technical and STEM areas. And there are also some projects in vocational education training schools and even in Erasmus to try to make these professions more, because we also need the women. They have a lot of talents. Yeah?
I really agree with that. One thing is it's an issue with me. Sorry.
We're going to need to carry on this conversation just after. We need to conclude here. Let's do a family picture, if I can suggest, to remember this moment. And thank you very much to all of you for your very thoughtful interventions. Thank you very much.